Hey guys, tonight we wander down one of the strangest alleys of human curiosity, the world of animal-human hybrids. Picture yourself stepping into a dimly lit laboratory where the air smells faintly of antiseptic and hay. Cages clatter softly, and a half-finished experiment blinks at you with impossible eyes. You probably won't survive this one without at least a shiver, or a smirk at the sheer audacity of humans trying to tangle life's rules. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, why not drop your location and local time in the comments? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your story begins not with microscopes or sterile labs, but with a restless, almost mischievous sense of wonder that humans have always carried. Early experiments, less about rigorous science, more about curiosity mixed with spectacle, were sometimes as simple as mixing animals in ways nature never intended. Imagine a medieval scholar observing the mating habits of rabbits, noting every twitch of ear and ripple of fur, while secretly wondering what would happen if traits could be combined with a human subject. Historians still argue whether this fascination was more about genuine inquiry or sheer entertainment, but the ambition was there, unmistakably, like the scent of parchment and spilled ink in an old library. Oddly enough, the seeds of these experiments were often inspired by mythology. The Greeks had chimeras, fire-breathing beasts stitched from lion, goat, and serpent. Egyptians revered gods like Anubis, part jackal, part human, whose images were carved into temple walls with meticulous care. These myths whispered a tantalizing question: could humans, clever and audacious, ever touch the divine by blending species? Fringe thinkers speculated wildly. Some believed that combining traits could produce immortality. Others imagined hybrids that could act as perfect soldiers or servants. You might smile now, imagining someone earnestly attempting to graft a rabbit's ears onto a person for heightened hearing. But that sense of wonder was very real, and it propelled experimentation in ways more subtle and more bizarre than you'd expect. Walking further into this early world, you trudge past cages filled with exotic creatures, each one observed, measured, and occasionally sketched. Scholars debated endlessly. Should the curiosity of the mind outweigh the natural order? Could crossing species boundaries be justified in the name of learning? They were meticulous note-takers, jotting down every twitch of whisker or blink of eye, though sometimes the notes veered into fantastical speculation. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen? Similar in its mix of absurdity and earnest intent, these early experiments often walk the line between science and storytelling. You can almost hear the whisper of parchment and the clink of glass as you tiptoe through these early hybrid laboratories, caught between fascination and disbelief, wondering where morality ends and curiosity begins. By the end of this section, you've already glimpsed the duality of human ambition, the drive to understand life's mysteries paired with a playful, sometimes reckless disregard for the natural boundaries between species. These first sparks of hybrid curiosity will guide us through centuries of increasingly daring and sometimes ethically alarming experimentation. And while you drift further into this tale, try to keep one eye open for the subtle hints of myth still lingering in the air, because they are the blueprint for much of what comes next. You trudge deeper into the hazy origins of hybrid obsession, where myth bleeds into the first whispers of human experimentation. Think Greek amphitheatres filled with marble statues of chimeras, lion bodies, goat heads, serpent tails, standing as reminders that humans have long toyed with the idea of combining species. You imagine yourself sketching one of these creatures under candlelight, the wax melting slowly, tiny drips forming pools like secret conspiracies on the parchment. Historians still argue whether these mythological visions were symbolic morality tales or subtle seeds of scientific curiosity. but the fascination with blending the familiar and the fantastic was undeniably potent. In Egypt, gods with animal heads and human bodies weren't just decorative, they were central to spiritual life. Anubis, with his jackal face, guided souls through the afterlife. Sekhmet, part lioness, part woman, represented destruction and healing simultaneously. You can almost feel the weight of the stone statues under your fingertips as you tiptoe past temple walls, imagining priests whispering prayers that doubled as early, genetic inspiration. Some fringe thinkers in later centuries even suggested that these deities weren't purely symbolic, but models for real-life hybrid creation, a notion both thrilling and, let's be honest, a little terrifying. Across the globe, similar ideas emerged independently. In Mesopotamia, winged bulls guarded palace gates. In India, depictions of Garuda combined bird and human traits, swooping across temple ceilings. You picture artisans carving these figures, every chisel mark a meditation on what it means to combine strength, intelligence, and instinct. The idea of hybridity wasn't purely aesthetic. It carried moral, spiritual, and even practical overtones. Could the wisdom of a human mind be married to the physical prowess of an animal? Scholars of the time debated endlessly. Their voices carried over the centuries. Would such combinations honour the gods or defy the natural order? By the Middle Ages, European curiosity began taking a slightly more tangible form. Fables of werewolves, mermaids, and half-human creatures weren't just stories for children. They were cautionary tales for curious minds willing to overstep nature's boundaries. In royal courts, exotic animals became living symbols of prestige and wonder. Picture a Renaissance noble pacing a gallery lined with lions, monkeys, and imported foxes, pondering not just their beauty, but whether blending their traits with humans could produce something extraordinary. Historians still argue whether these musings were innocent flights of imagination or the earlier sparks of experimental science. But the lines between legend and laboratory were already beginning to blur. Fringe legends persisted alongside documented observations. Some claimed monks had attempted to graft wings onto humans, hoping to emulate angels. Others suggested secret societies experimented with combining animals and humans for divine insight. You probably snicker at the thought of a man trying to fly with the rooster wings, but the ambition, sometimes reckless, sometimes brilliant, was part of the human story. In this phase, hybridity was more than a curiosity. It was an emblem of aspiration, a whisper that humans could, maybe, touch the impossible if only they dared. By the time you step back from these myths, the boundary between imagination and experimentation already feels porous. The hybrids of legend, the gods of Egypt, and the chimera of Greece collectively set the stage for centuries of experimentation that teetered between the absurd, the spiritual, and the scientifically daring. And as you let your eyelids grow heavy, the next step, medieval curiosity cages, beckons, promising both wonder and just enough unease to keep you awake, whispering, "Don't try this at home." You trudge into the heart of the Middle Ages, a time when superstition and curiosity danced awkwardly together in candlelit halls. Imagine European courts where exotic animals, lions, monkeys, and even the occasional falcon were paraded not only as trophies but as objects of study. Scholars and nobles alike observed them closely, noting behaviours and physical traits, sometimes pondering whether these creatures could somehow be combined with humans. Historians still argue whether these musings were purely entertainment or early scientific inquiry, but there's no denying the fascination with crossing species lines. You probably wouldn't volunteer for any study here, unless you fancied yourself part of a bestiary yourself. The cages themselves were an attraction, a lion pacing in a gilded enclosure, a monkey mimicking gestures with unsettling accuracy, a hawk gliding silently in a sunlit aviary. Each presented both beauty and a subtle ethical dilemma. Court physicians, often charged with maintaining the health of nobles, sometimes found themselves experimenting with animal remedies or behaviours, hoping to transfer the perceived strengths of these creatures to humans. Fringe records whisper of attempted grafts or injections using animal substances, though evidence is sketchy. You can almost hear the clatter of iron bars and the rustle of straw under curious feet as attendants whispered about the miracles being attempted behind thick wooden doors. Fables and folklore bled into reality in this period. Tales of werewolves and shape-shifting witches weren't just children's stories. They shaped how society perceived the natural and unnatural. People wondered if animal instincts could mingle with human cunning, and whether such mingling would bring power, wisdom, or calamity. Some chroniclers reported half-human, half-animal creatures sighted near monasteries or forests, though skeptics insisted these were either exaggerations or outright fabrications. Historians still debate whether these stories were moral warnings, misreported sightings, or genuine experiments that strayed too far into secrecy. By the 14th century, European curiosity had a slightly more tangible manifestation. Royal menageries, the precursors to modern zoos, housed animals specifically for observation and study. You can picture a prince leaning over the rail, inspecting a tiger's stripes, wondering if its strength could somehow be captured or replicated. Scholars collected feathers, claws, and teeth, cataloguing every detail in lavishly illustrated manuscripts. It was meticulous work, bordering on obsession, and in some cases, the line between observation and manipulation was dangerously thin. Remember those early mythic inspirations? This is where imagination starts nudging the hand of early science, prompting experiments that range from the quirky, feeding humans animal diets in hopes of shared traits, to the slightly unsettling, like applying animal extracts to human skin. Even more intriguing, some fringe alchemists claimed they could combine human and animal essences through potions, rituals, or complex mixtures, an early precursor to experimental bioalchemy. While most of these efforts were undoubtedly fanciful, they demonstrate a through line. Humans have long desired to bend the natural order, to play with the building blocks of life in ways both practical and fantastical. You might chuckle at the notion of a monk trying to graft a rooster's claw for divine insight, but these early curiosities laid the groundwork for centuries of increasingly daring and ethically questionable experiments. By the time you step back from these medieval curiosity cages, the stage is set, a mixture of awe, fear, and moral ambiguity that will carry forward into the Renaissance. The fascination with hybrids is no longer purely myth. It is beginning to seep into observation, documentation, and, for the bravest, or perhaps the most reckless, hands-on experimentation. And as you drift further, keep one eye on the strange intersection of spectacle and science, because the next section on Renaissance anatomical obsession promises closer encounters with the human body itself. You drift into the Renaissance, where the candlelight of curiosity is sharpened by the bright, almost blinding illumination of anatomical theatres. Picture yourself sitting on the wooden benches of a lecture hall, the smell of ink, herbs, and disinfectant mingling in the air as a lecturer dissects a cadaver under the gaze of eager students. The fascination with form, function, and symmetry now stretches beyond myth into tangible flesh. Historians still argue whether these dissections were primarily educational or partly motivated by a deeper obsession to understand and perhaps alter the human body. You probably wouldn't volunteer for the front row, but the tingling mix of dread and awe draws you closer anyway. Anatomical theatres were as much performance as science. The dissection of a human body, often freshly deceased, was a rare and spectacular event, sometimes accompanied by commentary on comparative anatomy. Scholars were increasingly interested in the similarities between humans and other animals. Leonardo da Vinci, for instance, famously studied the musculature of apes and humans side by side, sketching bones and sinews with uncanny precision. Fringe tales suggest he considered the possibility of hybrid experiments, though no record confirms it. You can almost imagine his notebooks filled with cryptic sketches that blend the familiar and the fantastic. The line between art, science, and obsession blurred in these vaulted rooms. Courtiers and physicians alike were not immune to curiosity. Some tried grafting experiments in private chambers, testing animal tissues or fluids on human subjects or vice versa. You might shiver imagining the procedure, but it was as much about experimentation as it was about status. To witness or attempt such a thing was to claim a fragment of knowledge previously reserved for gods and alchemists. Alchemical mixtures often accompanied these efforts, intended to preserve life, enhance strength, or reveal hidden properties of the body. Historians still debate whether these experiments ever achieved meaningful results, or if they were elaborate theatre designed to satisfy the Renaissance appetite for wonder. Anatomical knowledge also fed into medical treatments, some practical, some bizarre. Physicians noted the regenerative properties of certain animals and attempted to apply them to humans. Liver extracts, marrow infusions, or even the blood of young creatures in hopes of revitalizing aging patients. Fringe records whisper of apes whose organs were compared to humans for surgical insight, or of monkeys dissected for lessons in human musculature, sometimes leading to shocking illustrations that would haunt a viewer's dreams. You probably won't see these in a modern medical textbook, but their influence on anatomy and early hybrid experimentation is undeniable. Artists and anatomists collaborated to create lifelike models of combined species, sometimes purely imaginative, sometimes derived from observation. These models adorned cabinets of curiosity, where visitors could marvel at half-human, half-animal constructs, a tactile bridge between myth and science. You can almost hear the hushed speculation among students and nobles. Could the cunning of a monkey, the agility of a cat, the endurance of a horse ever be grafted into a human form? Some claimed yes, others scoffed, but the idea persisted, like a whisper that refuses to be silenced. Remember the medieval cages? The same drive to observe, to manipulate, and to push boundaries is alive here, only now sharpened by dissection knives and the ink of meticulous sketches. By the end of this section, the Renaissance has unveiled a world where curiosity tangibly touches the human form. Observation, documentation, and a creeping ambition to tinker with the essence of life lay the groundwork for the alchemical experiments to follow. And as your eyelids grow heavier, you sense the next chapter, alchemy and animal parts, lurking just ahead, promising both wonder and a faint twinge of unease. You slide into the murky, fragrant world of alchemy, where smoke curls around candlelit tables and the line between science and magic blurs into a hazy grey. Imagine yourself perched on a stool, watching an alchemist stir a bubbling concoction, the clink of glass vessels mingling with the scent of herbs and roasted animal parts. Some of these early practitioners genuinely believed that combining animal organs, blood, or powders could unlock secrets of immortality, cure disease, or even turn base metals into gold. Historians still argue whether alchemy was proto-science or elaborate superstition, but tonight, for the sake of imagination, you feel the tension of possibility. This is the birthplace of some of humanity's most audacious biological curiosities. Animal parts were prized ingredients in this world. You might cringe as you glimpse dried toads, powdered beaks, or mummified cats stacked alongside human hair and bone. Some alchemists claimed that blending human and animal essences in potions could transfer strength, courage, or vitality from one to the other. Fringe journals whispered of attempts to create a human-animal essence. The results were mostly anecdotal, often grotesque, and sometimes purely imaginative. Picture a small vial of liquid glowing faintly green under a candle, labelled in ornate script with promises that sound as much like poetry as science. Strength of wolf, courage of man, essence of life. It's enough to make you shiver and maybe giggle at the sheer ambition. These mixtures weren't purely mystical. Alchemists documented effects in careful, often obsessive detail. Some reported enhanced vitality after using animal-derived remedies. Others noted strange side effects like temporary hallucinations or heightened senses. You might smirk imagining someone nibbling powdered bat wings to see if they could fly, or dabbing frog blood on their skin hoping for the leap of a frog. But this is the lineage of experimentation, blending observation, hope, and bravado. Historians still debate whether any of these preparations had real medicinal value, or if the benefits were placebo, ritual, or sheer imagination. Alchemical interest in hybrids often intersected with medical curiosity. There were attempts to graft animal tissues or extract essences for healing purposes, a practice that sometimes bordered on experimental surgery. You can hear the faint scratching of quill on parchment as observations are recorded, noting who survived, who reacted oddly, and who, predictably, didn't benefit at all. The ethical line was, by modern standards, non-existent, yet there was a rigour to the note-taking that hints at the beginnings of systematic inquiry. Remember those Renaissance anatomical sketches? The same meticulousness extends here, though applied to the blending of life forces rather than the dissection of flesh. And then there's the showmanship. Some alchemists would display their concoctions in front of noble patrons, claiming to produce tiny hybrid creatures or elixirs that could imbue human bodies with animal traits. You might roll your eyes at the theatricality, but the audience of the time probably gasped, eyes wide, imagining the impossible coming to life before them. These staged experiments straddled the line between science, theatre, and ethical ambiguity, feeding a fascination that would eventually evolve into documented grafting and early hybrid experimentation. By the end of this chapter, you're steeped in the scent, spectacle, and audacity of alchemical practices, animal parts, mystical intentions, and human ambition intermingle in ways that feel both absurd and inevitable. And as you settle in, the next section on 17th century grafting experiments promises to bring these early ideas into sharper, more tangible, and slightly unsettling contact with reality. You trudge forward into the 17th century, a time when curiosity sharpened into hands-on experimentation. Imagine narrow, candlelit laboratories, walls lined with jars, surgical instruments glinting in the flickering light, and the occasional squawk or hiss from caged animals. It's here that the earliest documented grafting experiments between animals and humans begin to appear, not in textbooks as much as in whispered letters, anecdotal accounts, and fringe pamphlets. Historians still argue whether these were isolated eccentricities or part of a broader scientific impulse, but you can feel the ambition tangling with ethical ambiguity. You probably wouldn't volunteer your arm for a goatskin graft, but the daring of these early experimenters is almost hypnotic. Some of these early grafts were surprisingly methodical. Physicians experimented with transplanting animal skin patches onto human subjects, often to treat burns or wounds, though the motivation sometimes blended practical medicine with pure curiosity. Fringe accounts report attempts to graft small animal appendages or tissue in hopes of transferring traits, stronger fingers, heightened senses, or even animal-like resilience. Picture a curious scholar carefully stitching a rabbit's ear to a human cadaver, quill poised to record every twitch or reaction. You can almost hear the scratching of notes, punctuated by the soft gasp of an assistant peering over the table. Public reaction to such experiments was a volatile mix of fascination and horror. Early journals and pamphlets describe shocked onlookers, some applauding the ingenuity, others denouncing the audacity as blasphemy. Remember those Renaissance anatomical theatres? The spectacle of a living or semi-living hybrid experiment was the logical, if ethically murky, extension. Fringe whispers claim that some grafted subjects survive temporarily, prompting claims of miraculous results or divine intervention, Skeptics, however, suggested exaggeration or outright fabrication. Historians still debate how much of this era's documentation is reliable, but the fervour for pushing biological limits is undeniable. These experiments also intersected with other contemporary sciences. Alchemy lingered, influencing methods and explanations, while natural philosophy provided frameworks to rationalize these crossings of species. Some physicians were motivated by a desire to understand regeneration, a principle observed in animals such as lizards or newts, and wondered if humans could borrow similar capabilities. You might chuckle at the thought of someone applying salamander essence to heal a burn, yet this curiosity laid the foundation for more sophisticated explorations in embryology and transplantation centuries later. Even social and political pressures shaped these experiments. Nobles and wealthy patrons funded daring investigations, both for the prestige of sponsoring cutting-edge science and for the thrill of witnessing something previously unimaginable. Imagine a prince leaning over a table, his face bathed in candlelight, whispering encouragement, or perhaps a half-amused curse, to the experimenter. Reports suggest some experiments were conducted in secret, hiding their results to avoid ecclesiastical censure or public backlash. The tension between secrecy, curiosity, and spectacle created a charged atmosphere where imagination and reality blurred. By the end of this section, you're standing on the cusp of modernity. Grafting experiments have introduced the first tangible attempts to merge species, blending observation, ambition, and ethical grey zones. And as your mind lingers on stitched ears and whispered promises of animal traits, the next section, Mad Scientists of the Enlightenment, awaits, promising a stage where eccentricity, public demonstration, and the pursuit of knowledge collide in full view of an astonished society. You trudge into the age of enlightenment, a world drenched in curiosity, eccentricity, and the perfume of possibility. Picture grand salons lit by chandeliers, thick with candle smoke, where learned gentlemen and ladies gather to hear of wondrous experiments, sometimes involving human-animal hybrids. Mad scientists, sometimes geniuses, sometimes charlatans, prided themselves on public displays of their daring manipulations. Historians still argue whether these demonstrations advanced science meaningfully or were primarily spectacles of hubris. But the energy is undeniable. You probably wouldn't volunteer to be part of the demonstration, but it's difficult not to be drawn into the combination of intellect, audacity, and performance. These experimenters pushed boundaries with both precision and flair. Some sought to graft animal organs onto human cadavers. Others tested sensory transference, like attaching a frog's eye to a human skull for enhanced vision in low light. You might smirk at the absurdity, but the commitment to observation, measurement, and documentation is impressive, even if the results were often inconclusive or grotesque. Fringe reports from the time suggest some attempted partial hybridizations using animal fluids in early transfusions, though the ethical and methodological standards were, by today's definitions, non-existent. Yet the ambition, bordering on obsession, set the stage for centuries of experimentation to follow. The public's fascination was palpable. Salons, coffee houses, and early scientific societies buzzed with accounts of these hybrids, blending fact, exaggeration, and rumour. Some patrons funded experiments hoping to glimpse immortality, enhanced senses, or even glimpses of divine essence through hybrid forms. Remember the medieval cages, the Renaissance theatres, the alchemical flasks? This is the logical and far more theatrical extension. Witnesses often described a mix of awe, horror, and excitement, their letters and journals providing tantalizing, if not entirely reliable, glimpses into these events. Historians still debate which accounts were genuine observation and which were sensationalized for social prestige. Notably, some experiments had surprisingly systematic aspects. Mad scientists measured pulse, temperature, and tissue reactions, recording results meticulously. Others combined anatomical knowledge with alchemical preparations, hoping to preserve or enhance hybrid traits. Picture a scholar weighing the heart of a pigeon against the chest of a cadaver, noting subtle differences with the fervour of a poet capturing a sunset. Some experiments reportedly produced transient physiological changes. Others were spectacular failures, prompting a mixture of laughter, horror, and awe from the audience. Even as eccentricity dominated, Enlightenment hybridists contributed to broader scientific knowledge. Comparative anatomy, embryology, and early physiological studies benefited from their daring, if ethically questionable, experiments. You can imagine them pacing their chambers at midnight, muttering about transferring the courage of a lion or the agility of a monkey into a human subject. Some fringe claims even suggested minor successes, though contemporary observers often dismissed them as exaggeration or delusion. Still, the cultural and scientific impact is undeniable. The Enlightenment solidified hybrid experimentation as a blend of science, art, and spectacle. By the time you leave this world of salons and chandeliers, you understand that hybrid experimentation has become both public theatre and scientific pursuit, with curiosity and ambition entwined in ways that are both thrilling and unsettling. And as your eyelids droop, you can sense the next chapter, 19th century vivisection craze, looming, promising darker, more invasive explorations into the murky ethics of crossing species boundaries. You trudge into the 19th century, where the vivisection craze sweeps across Europe and America like a fever, and curiosity transforms into something far more invasive. Imagine tall, narrow laboratories with iron tables, surgical instruments gleaming under oil lamps, and the scent of antiseptic mingling with animal musk. Scientists slice, probe, and observe, driven by the belief that understanding life's inner workings could unlock nature's deepest secrets. Historians still argue whether this obsession was justified by genuine medical progress or whether it teetered dangerously close to cruelty, but the results undeniably shaped modern physiology. You probably wouldn't volunteer to sit on one of those tables, but the mixture of dread, fascination, and awe is almost hypnotic. Vivisection in this era wasn't limited to routine animal studies. Some bold or reckless experimenters sought to cross species boundaries, testing ideas that would have seemed unimaginable just a century before. Frogs, dogs, and rabbits became subjects for early grafting and organ experiments, with observers noting reactions to stimuli, nerve impulses, and rudimentary attempts at transplantation. Fringe reports suggest some experimented with connecting animal blood vessels to human cadavers, or creating composite limbs in the name of scientific exploration. You might laugh nervously imagining a guinea pig with a partially grafted human finger. Yet these tests were part of a broader effort to understand life in precise, measurable terms. The public response was a mixture of fascination, horror, and moral outrage. Newspapers, pamphlets, and emerging photography captured some of these experiments, sensationalizing the results and stirring debate. Remember the Enlightenment salons, where eccentricity and performance overlapped. Here, the spectacle becomes grimmer, the stakes higher, and the ethical boundaries blur. Fringe stories describe citizens peering through shutters at hidden laboratories, whispering rumours of partially animated hybrids, or even of attempts to combine intelligence from one species with the physical resilience of another. Historians still debate the veracity of these tales, but the cultural imprint is unmistakable. The idea that humans might merge with animals captivated imaginations far beyond the laboratory. Scientific curiosity mingled with ethical debates. The notion that anatomical observation could justify extreme interventions gained traction, particularly in the context of medical advancement. Some vivisectionists argue that testing on animals was a necessary step toward understanding disease, nervous systems, and surgical techniques. Others, however, protested vocally. decrying cruelty and warning against human arrogance. You might smirk at the pamphlets railing against monstrous experiments. But these ethical arguments mark the beginnings of a conversation that continues into modern bioethics. Additionally, some 19th century researchers flirted with the fantastical. They proposed that certain animal organs might enhance human function if transplanted, or that embryonic tissue could be manipulated to produce hybrid creatures. These ideas, often speculative, reflect the lingering influence of earlier centuries' myths, Renaissance curiosity, and alchemical imagination. Imagine a lab notebook filled with careful sketches of a rabbit skeleton beside a human hand, lines connecting muscles, veins, and nerves in ways that hint at what might be possible. Fringe claims suggest that minor successes, like temporary attachment of animal tissue, sparked sensational reports, though most attempts failed or produced grotesque results. By the end of this section, the 19th century stands as a pivotal moment. Hybrid experimentation has become invasive, measured, and ethically fraught, a bridge between theoretical speculation and modern laboratory science. And as you begin to feel the weight of history settling over your eyelids, the next section, Hybrid Legends in Popular Culture, awaits, promising tales of exaggeration, fear, and the enduring power of imagination. You trudge into the world of hybrid legends in popular culture, where newspapers, pamphlets, and illustrated books sensationalize the strange experiments of previous centuries. Imagine a smoky parlour where a family huddles over the latest illustrated pamphlet depicting half-human, half-animal creatures, eyes wide and mouths agape, each page designed to thrill and terrify. Historians still argue whether these accounts exaggerated real experiments or invented them entirely, but the effect is undeniable. Public imagination becomes an active participant in the science of hybrids. You probably wouldn't want to read some of these stories alone at night, but the mixture of fear, fascination, and amusement keeps you turning the pages. The press of the 18th and 19th centuries loved hybrids. Reports of monstrous births in Europe, deformed calves with human-like features, lambs with extra limbs, were widely circulated. Some of these were likely congenital anomalies, others were fabricated or embellished for shock value. Fringe pamphlets claimed secret experiments in remote laboratories, mixing human and animal traits in ways that defied natural law. Picture the exaggerated illustrations: a man with a rooster's wings, a child with a cat's ears, eyes gleaming with eerie intelligence. You might chuckle nervously, but the fascination is real, and it shaped the way hybrid experimentation was perceived by society at large. Theatre and literature added fuel to the fire. Plays depicted half-human, half-animal creatures as tragic or monstrous figures, morality tales warning against the hubris of crossing natural boundaries. Think of Gothic novels filled with scientists experimenting in hidden towers, their creations both wondrous and horrific. Historians still debate whether these depictions reflected actual experiments or merely amplified contemporary anxieties. But the cultural imprint was profound. Readers and audiences began to associate hybrids with both curiosity and danger, a duality that persists even in modern depictions of genetic engineering. Public fascination often fed back into experimental science itself. Inventive minds sometimes sought to recreate or verify the fantastical hybrids described in print, blending observation with imagination. Fringe reports suggest that some scientists conducted experiments inspired by illustrations or tales, trying to capture traits described in lurid detail. Imagine a laboratory filled with sketches of creatures from newspapers, each one a blueprint for potential experimentation. Some experiments were practical, like studying cross-species organ function, while others were bizarre, attempting to bring illustrated monsters into reality. You notice a pattern emerging. Fascination, exaggeration, and experimentation create a loop where culture informs science, and science informs culture. By the end of this section, hybrid legends have cemented themselves as more than folklore. They're catalysts, shaping curiosity, ambition, and public discourse. And as you drift toward the edge of sleep, the next chapter, early 20th century genetic tinkering, awaits, promising a transition from myth and spectacle into the emerging discipline of embryology and genetics, where dreams of hybridity begin to touch reality. You trudge into the early 20th century, a period when genetics begins to tease the edges of possibility, and hybrid experimentation steps cautiously into the realm of measurable science. Picture a lab with sunlight streaming through tall windows, microscopes glinting on polished benches, and glass slides lined up like soldiers. Embryologists study the earlier stages of life, peering at cells under magnification, contemplating whether the human and animal worlds might somehow intersect at this microscopic frontier. Historians still argue whether these early experiments were scientifically sound or fueled more by ambition than understanding, but the fascination is palpable. You probably wouldn't volunteer for any microscopic manipulation, but the thrill of potential discovery buzzes like electricity in the air. Researchers began to explore cross-species cell cultures and embryonic grafts. Some experimented with transplanting animal tissue into chick embryos, noting which traits persisted or disappeared. Fringe journals whispered of attempts to introduce mammalian cells into human embryos. Though these claims were often speculative or exaggerated, picture an embryologist adjusting a tiny pipette under a microscope, eyes wide in concentration as they watch cells divide and migrate, a dance of life where boundaries blur, but the ethical stakes remain abstract. Historians still debate how much these early studies genuinely informed future hybrid science, but the theoretical groundwork was undeniable. Public reaction was a mixture of wonder and trepidation. Popular science magazines reported embryology experiments with a mix of awe and fear, often invoking half-humorous warnings of monstrous creations lurking in petri dishes. Some fringe writers suggested that if humanity pushed too far, we might inadvertently create hybrids capable of extraordinary intelligence or strength. You might smirk, imagining a mouse with human reasoning pacing a laboratory. But these speculative fears reflected genuine societal anxiety about the limits of scientific meddling. Some pioneering scientists, inspired by mythology as much as by observation, proposed small-scale hybridization projects, mixing mammalian embryos with human cells to study developmental processes. The experiments were crude, often failing to produce viable results. But the questions they raised were profound. Could human traits be isolated and merged with other species? Could disease resistance, longevity, or cognitive traits be manipulated through embryonic intervention? Fringe whispers of half-human, half-animal embryos occasionally appeared in correspondence between researchers, blending genuine curiosity with sensational speculation. By the end of this section, early 20th century genetics has shifted hybrid experimentation from public spectacle to laboratory inquiry, grounded in embryology and cellular science. You can almost hear the faint scribble of pen on notebook as observers record every division, every anomaly, and every fleeting success. The stage is now set for wartime secrecy, ethical quandaries, and the kind of ambition that blurs moral lines. And as your eyelids grow heavy, the next chapter, Wuhu's Secret Labs, looms, promising both historical intrigue and shadowy experiments hidden from the public eye. You trudge into the shadowed corridors of World War II, a time when scientific ambition was often cloaked in secrecy and driven by the exigencies of war. Picture hidden laboratories, dimly lit with the occasional flicker of a candle or electric bulb, the scent of chemicals mingling with fear and anticipation. Scientists, sometimes brilliant, sometimes morally flexible, pursued experiments that straddled the line between innovation and horror. Historians still argue whether these wartime endeavours advanced genuine science or simply indulged human curiosity in ethically fraught ways. But the intensity is undeniable. You probably wouldn't volunteer to observe these experiments firsthand, yet the allure of forbidden knowledge tugs at your imagination. Some labs explored cross-species biology with a focus on practical outcomes for warfare, strengthening soldiers, healing wounds, or understanding disease transmission. Reports, often classified, suggest attempts at tissue grafts between animals and humans, or testing animal-derived serums on human subjects. Fringe accounts, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes credible, whisper of more radical experiments, chimeric tissue cultures, manipulations of sensory systems, and the early use of hybrid cells for testing regenerative treatments. You might wince imagining the meticulous procedures, the gleam of scalpel edges under harsh lamps, or the quiet recording of reactions that would shock modern ethical boards. Public knowledge of these experiments was minimal, intentionally obscured by governments. Some leaked reports surfaced in newspapers, often sensationalized, portraying mad scientists tinkering with life in ways both thrilling and terrifying. Remember the 19th century vivisection craze, where curiosity flirted with cruelty? Now, the stakes are higher, the secrecy tighter, and the consequences potentially lethal. Fringe tales circulated of half-animal, half-human experiments carried out in hidden bunkers, fueling both fear and fascination, though historians still debate the accuracy of these accounts. The scientific rationale, when it existed, was often intertwined with desperation. Disease-resistant traits observed in animals were tested as possible enhancements for soldiers. Regenerative capacities in amphibians inspired attempts at human tissue repair. Some fringe reports even suggested attempts to create hybridized organisms capable of performing specific wartime functions, though results were largely inconclusive. You can almost hear the whispers of assistance, the soft scribble of notes, and the occasional clink of instruments as knowledge was gathered in secrecy. By the end of this section, Wu's shadow has brought hybrid experimentation into morally ambiguous terrain, where ambition, fear, and secrecy collide. These hidden projects, often experimental and ethically fraught, set the stage for post-war advances in cellular and genetic research. And as you drift, the next chapter, Cold War scientific daring, awaits, promising a period where geopolitical tension accelerates hybrid experimentation and ethical debates intensify. You trudge into the tense, high-stakes world of the Cold War, where scientific ambition raced alongside political rivalry, and hybrid experimentation became a quiet but persistent obsession. Picture clandestine labs behind steel doors, humming with the whir of centrifuges and the faint metallic scent of preserved specimens. Intelligence agencies and government-funded scientists pursued research that straddled the line between plausible innovation and fantastical speculation. Historians still argue whether some of these programs genuinely aimed to improve human resilience, or were simply fueled by paranoia and the thrill of secrecy. But the intensity of purpose is undeniable. You probably wouldn't volunteer to witness these experiments. Yet the allure of forbidden knowledge, now backed by national stakes, is impossible to resist. Hybrid experimentation during this era often focused on genetics, tissue engineering, and the early foundations of what we now call biotechnology. Researchers experimented with animal tissue grafts, exploring whether regenerative capacities from certain species could be applied to humans. Fringe reports suggested attempts to create composite embryos, mixing animal and human cells in petri dishes under strict secrecy. Imagine the tiny microscopes, the sterile tools, and scientists peering intently as cells divide, merge, or reject one another. You can almost hear the low hum of incubators and the scribble of notes, each line a whisper of possibility and ethical tension. Historians still debate how many of these projects produced viable insights versus speculative failure. Public awareness was minimal, though rumours occasionally surfaced in newspapers, science journals, or sensational magazines, these whispers of human-animal chimeras sparked fascination and fear, often framed as warnings against unchecked scientific ambition. Remember the Enlightenment salons and Victorian pamphlets? Now the stakes are international, and the audience is both more sophisticated and more anxious. Fringe narratives circulated of experiments designed to enhance intelligence, endurance, or sensory acuity by borrowing traits from animals. While most claims remain unverified, they reflect the enduring human fascination with blending the familiar with the fantastic. Ethical oversight was often absent or ambiguous. Scientists justified experimentation in the name of national security, medical advancement, or the perceived inevitability of scientific progress. Some reports suggest that extreme secrecy allowed ethically dubious procedures to proceed unchecked, from embryonic manipulation to animal to human tissue grafts. You might shiver at the mental image of a scientist quietly observing cellular reactions in a dimly lit Cold War lab, knowing that the results, if any, could shape the edge of human capability. By the end of this section, Cold War hybrid experimentation has become a high-stakes intersection of science, secrecy, and ambition, where geopolitical tension amplifies both curiosity and moral ambiguity. And as you sink further into the story, the next chapter, Modern Genetic Engineering and Chimeras, promises to bring these experiments into the present day, where the dream of human-animal hybrids teeters on the edge of reality, ethics, and imagination. You trudge into the world of modern genetic engineering, where the ancient dream of creating hybrids has finally brushed against the tangible edge of possibility. Imagine pristine laboratories filled with the soft hum of incubators, high-tech microscopes, and the faint scent of antiseptics, where scientists manipulate DNA sequences with precision that would have seemed magical to their predecessors. Historians still argue whether contemporary experimentation fulfills humanity's long-standing fascination with hybridity or merely explores the frontiers of medicine and agriculture, but the impact is unmistakable. You probably wouldn't volunteer for a DNA splice, yet the thrill of watching life's code rearranged is both mesmerizing and slightly unnerving. Researchers today explore chimeras by introducing cells from one species into the embryos of another, often mice or pigs, to study organ development, disease progression, or regenerative therapies. Some fringe studies flirt with the notion of human-animal combinations in a controlled laboratory setting, though ethical review boards rigorously oversee these experiments. Picture a scientist carefully injecting human stem cells into a pig embryo, eyes fixed on a monitor as the cells integrate. You can almost feel the tension in the room, the quiet excitement mingling with the weight of moral responsibility. Historians still debate whether these modern hybrids are truly analogous to the mythical or Renaissance concepts of blended creatures, or if they occupy a wholly new ethical and scientific space. Public perception is a complex web of fascination, fear, and moral inquiry. News outlets report breakthroughs in organ regeneration or disease modelling, while fringe speculation imagines more sensational hybrids. Remember the 19th century pamphlets and Cold War whispers. The theme persists. Humans have long wondered whether crossing species boundaries could grant intelligence, strength, or longevity. Now, the discussion includes bioethics committees, regulatory frameworks, and debates over the limits of experimentation. You might smirk imagining tabloid headlines of half-human, half-pig super soldiers, yet these narratives often obscure real scientific nuance. Ethical oversight dominates modern practice. Institutional review boards, international guidelines, and public engagement aim to balance curiosity with responsibility. Some experiments aim to grow human-compatible organs in animals for transplantation, a project both promising and controversial. Fringe speculation persists, though most scientists focus on disease research, regenerative medicine, and understanding developmental biology rather than creating sentient hybrids. You can imagine a lab technician whispering to a monitor, noting cell migration, division, and integration, mindful of both scientific potential and moral obligation. By the end of this section, modern genetic engineering shows that the centuries-old dream of hybrid creation has evolved from myth and spectacle into deliberate, highly regulated exploration. And as you drift toward a soft exhale, the next chapter, Ethics and Public Debate, awaits, promising to examine the tensions, controversies, and societal reflections that accompany humanity's pursuit of blended life. You trudge into the tangled thicket of ethics and public debate, where modern society wrestles with the implications of hybrid experimentation. Imagine crowded lecture halls, online forums buzzing with commentary, and policy meetings where scientists, ethicists, and politicians argue over the boundaries of life itself. Historians still debate how much public perception shapes scientific direction versus how much sensationalized stories influence societal unease. But the conversation is pervasive. You probably wouldn't want to chair a bioethics committee, yet the intensity of the questions, what we can do versus what we should do, pulls you in like a moth to a cautious flame. Modern ethics examines consent, sentience, and the welfare of both human and animal participants. Regulations mandate rigorous review, particularly for experiments involving chimeric embryos or organ generation. Fringe discussions, however, flirt with the philosophical. Could a human-animal hybrid possess consciousness? Would traits like cognition, instinct, or moral reasoning emerge in unexpected combinations? You can almost hear the whispered debates in dimly lit labs, the scribble of notes weighing risks, benefits, and the slippery slope of ambition. Historians still argue whether early hybrids' mythic allure continues to influence today's ethical frameworks, or if society now faces entirely new moral territory. Public fascination remains undimmed. Popular media often sensationalizes chimeric research, creating vivid mental images that blend science with horror, humor, or fantasy. Remember the illustrated pamphlets of monstrous births, the Renaissance anatomical sketches, and Cold War rumors. These cultural echoes shape how society interprets modern experiments, influencing legislation, funding, and even academic research priorities. You might chuckle at some conspiracy theories, yet the broader anxiety reflects enduring curiosity about the boundaries of life and the consequences of bending them. Debates also extend to medical and environmental applications. Scientists explore growing human-compatible organs in pigs, but questions arise about identity, natural order, and unintended ecological effects. Ethical discussions probe whether survival imperatives, such as organ scarcity, justify experiments that might have been unthinkable just decades ago. Some fringe voices even speculate about designer traits or the improvement of humans through hybridization, a concept historically rejected but persistently alluring. By the end of this section, you sense the delicate balance of fascination, responsibility, and caution shaping hybrid experimentation. Modern science has transformed myth into regulated practice, yet society must continuously negotiate its moral compass. And as your eyelids flutter in the dim light, the next chapter, the future of hybrids, awaits, promising glimpses into the possibilities, promises, and perils of tomorrow's blending of species. You trudge into the horizon of the future, where the boundaries between human and animal, myth and reality, are teased by the promise of advancing technology. Picture gleaming laboratories filled with robotic pipettes, AI-assisted microscopes, and climate-controlled incubators where researchers delicately manipulate cells with precision unimaginable even a few decades ago. Historians still argue whether our fascination with hybrids is a reflection of eternal curiosity or a dangerous flirtation with playing God. But the pull is irresistible. You probably wouldn't volunteer your DNA for experimental splicing, yet the excitement, tinged with unease, pulses through the room like a slow, electric heartbeat. Emerging technologies like CRISPR, stem cell therapy, and synthetic biology now make hybridization a scientifically plausible, though highly regulated, pursuit. Researchers explore growing human-compatible organs in animals, modelling diseases with humanized mice, and studying organoid systems that blur the line between species. Fringe speculation imagines chimeric enhancements, superior vision, heightened senses, or novel cognitive abilities. But most scientists approach these ideas cautiously, aware of the ethical, psychological, and ecological implications. You can almost feel the hum of incubators and the soft tap of keyboards as each experiment inches toward discovery while keeping a careful ethical eye. Public discourse is increasingly sophisticated yet remains fascinated by the fantastic. Popular culture, science fiction, and news media continue to explore hybrid concepts, blending realistic science with imagination. Remember the medieval cages, Renaissance theatres, 19th century vivisection, and Cold War secrecy. All these chapters echo forward, shaping contemporary expectations and fears. Ethical committees, regulatory boards, and global organizations now debate the boundaries of experimentation, weighing medical potential against moral risk, creating a framework intended to prevent past mistakes from repeating. The questions are profound. Could hybrid organs revolutionize medicine, reduce human suffering, and expand our understanding of life? Or might unchecked ambition produce unintended consequences, ecological disruption, or moral dilemmas beyond current comprehension? Fringe speculation keeps the imagination alive, inspiring ethical caution and creative exploration alike. You might chuckle at some of the more sensational visions, half-human, half-dolphin researchers swimming in tanks, but these cultural echoes illustrate the enduring allure of the hybrid dream. By the end of this section, you sense that humanity's fascination with animal-human hybrids has evolved from myth, spectacle, and moral ambiguity into a carefully regulated frontier of possibility. And as your thoughts drift, the next part, the gentle wind down, awaits, softening the intensity of centuries into a soothing reflective conclusion. You trudge into the final moments of this journey, where the frenetic energy of centuries of hybrid experimentation begins to soften into a calm reflection. Imagine yourself reclining in a quiet room, the soft hum of a fan in the background, dim light brushing your closed eyelids, and the scent of night air mingling with faint traces of old books and candle wax. Over the course of human history, curiosity has driven us to peek behind the curtain of life itself, sometimes boldly, sometimes recklessly, but always with wonder. You probably won't become a hybrid scientist tonight, and that's perfectly fine. You can let your imagination wander safely here, letting the stories of ambition, ethics, and possibility wash over you. From medieval cages to Renaissance dissections, from alchemical flasks to Enlightenment salons, humanity has flirted with the impossible, often blurring the line between myth and science. You might remember the whispered rumours of Cold War labs, the sensationalist pamphlets, and the careful modern studies, threads of fascination woven into a tapestry of our enduring desire to understand and, at times, to transcend our natural limitations. Even today, as genetic engineering and stem cell research inch closer to what once was the stuff of fantasy, we carry forward lessons about responsibility, ethics, and the humility necessary when tampering with life's fundamental code. Take a slow, deep breath now, letting the tension of the narrative ebb. Feel the weight of centuries settling gently around you, not as burden but as a story shared, a reflection of human curiosity and imagination. Let your body sink further into the mattress or chair, muscles relaxing, mind softening. The fantastical hybrids, the shadowed labs, and the whispered experiments now exist only as echoes in your mind, dissolving into calm imagery of quiet rooms, soft lights, and the gentle rhythm of your breathing. Let your thoughts drift like leaves on a still pond, knowing the world continues outside, while inside you float safely through history's shadows and lights. With each exhale, allow sleep to creep closer, carrying you past centuries of curiosity, discovery, and imagination into your own restful night.